Welcome back to Love and Focus. Help us out by subscribing so we can keep bringing you more stories. The day my world came crashing down started like any other. I woke up next to my husband, Mark, the warm sunlight streaming through our bedroom curtains. As I watched him sleep, I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest. Something had been off lately. Hushed phone calls, furrowed brows when he thought I wasn't looking. But I pushed the feeling aside and got ready for work. I'm Sarah, by the way, a 35-year-old marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company, or at least, I was. Looking back, I wish I'd paid more attention to those little signs. Maybe then I could have prevented the disaster that was about to unfold. At the office, there was a nervous energy in the air. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when I walked by. My assistant, Jen, couldn't quite meet my eyes when she handed me my morning coffee. I tried to focus on my work, but the unease grew stronger with each passing hour. Around lunchtime, Mark called, "Hey, honey, can you meet me at Roselli's in 20 minutes? There's something we need to talk about." My stomach dropped. Roselli's was where we went for serious conversations, both good and bad. The tremor in his voice told me this wasn't going to be a celebration. When I arrived, Mark was already seated in our usual booth, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. My husband never drank during the day. This couldn't be good. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "the company, it's bankrupt. We're shutting down." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? How? When?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, his wedding ring catching the light. "It's been coming for a while. The board kept it quiet, hoping for a miracle. But it's over. We have to start laying people off today." I felt like I was drowning, struggling to process this information. Our company had always seemed so stable, so successful. How could this be happening? "But what about us? Our jobs?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. "That's the thing, Sarah. As CFO, I have to decide who stays to help with the liquidation and who goes immediately. It's not going to be easy." A chill ran down my spine. "Mark, tell me you're keeping me on. We can't both lose our jobs at once. Our mortgage, the kids' college funds." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I had to make an impossible choice." As he explained, my world tilted on its axis. Mark had chosen to keep his old college friend, Dave, instead of me. Dave, with his new baby and mounting medical bills. Dave, who had been there for Mark during some of his darkest times. "I couldn't do that to him, Sarah," Mark pleaded. "You're brilliant. You'll find another job in no time. Dave, this would destroy him." I yanked my hand away, fury and betrayal coursing through me. "And what about us, Mark? What about our family?" The rest of the lunch passed in a blur. Mark's promises that we'd be okay, that he'd find something else quickly, that we had savings to fall back on. They all rang hollow in my ears. As I walked back to the office to clean out my desk, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of resumes, job applications, and increasingly desperate attempts to cut costs. Mark threw himself into wrapping up the company's affairs, working long hours alongside Dave. I tried not to resent them, but every time Mark came home smelling of Dave's cigarettes, a little piece of my heart hardened. Our savings dwindled faster than we expected. The job market was brutal, with hundreds of my former colleagues all competing for the same positions. As the rejections piled up, so did the bills. We cut back everywhere we could, but it wasn't enough. One night, after the kids were in bed, I found Mark at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and empty beer bottles. "We're going to lose the house," he said, his voice hollow. "I've run the numbers every way I can. There's no way we can keep up with the payments." I sank into the chair across from him, numb. How could you let this happen, Mark? How could you choose Dave over your own family? His eyes flashed with anger. You think this was easy for me? I had to make an impossible choice. You made the wrong choice, I shouted, all the pent-up frustration and fear bursting out. We're your family, Mark. We should have come first. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I did what I thought was right. We needed you. I cut him off. The kids needed you. I needed you, but you weren't there. You were too busy playing savior to your friend to see your own family drowning. Mark's face crumpled, the fight draining out of him. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could save everyone. As I watched my husband break down, I felt a confusing mix of anger, love, and despair. How had we ended up here? How could I hate and love this man so much at the same time? I moved around the table, wrapping my arms around him as we both cried, for our lost security, for our uncertain future, for the strain this was putting on our marriage. As we held each other in our soon-to-be lost kitchen, I wondered if our love would be strong enough to weather this storm. The next morning, I woke up with a new resolve. If Mark couldn't fix this, I would. I reached out to every contact I had, called in every favor. Finally, my old college roommate, Alexis, came through with a lead on a job at her company. As I got ready for the interview, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe this could be our lifeline, the thing that would keep us afloat. I was just about to leave when my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Good luck today. I love you. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Despite everything, a part of me still longed for his support, his love, but another part, the part that was still raw and hurting, hesitated. Finally, I typed out a response. Thanks. We'll talk when I get home. As I walked out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that this interview wasn't just about a job. It was about the future of our family, our marriage, everything we'd built together. And I was terrified of what would happen if I failed. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and headed towards the car. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah, wait! Mark's voice called out just as I reached for the car door handle. I turned, seeing him jog down our driveway, still in his pajamas. What is it, Mark? I can't be late for this interview. He reached me, slightly out of breath. I know, I needed to tell you something before you go. I reached for the car door handle, torn between my need to leave for the interview and my curiosity about what Mark had to say. Make it quick, Mark. This interview is too important. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I hadn't seen in weeks. I've been thinking all night, Sarah. You're right. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm going to fix it. As I drove to the interview, Mark's words echoed in my mind. He'd promised to call Dave to explain that he'd made a mistake and needed to prioritize his family. It was what I'd wanted to hear for weeks. But now that he'd said it, I felt an unexpected twinge of guilt. Dave's face flashed in my mind, his hopeful smile at the company Christmas party, his wife's growing belly. I pushed the thought away. I had to focus on this interview. Our future depended on it. Alexis's company was housed in a gleaming skyscraper, a stark contrast to the modest offices I'd left behind. As I sat in the plush waiting room, I couldn't help but feel out of place. The receptionist's designer outfit probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Mrs. Thompson, a sleek, professional woman, appeared, hand outstretched. I'm Vanessa Moore, head of marketing. Please, come with me. The interview started well. I spoke passionately about my experience, my ideas for their upcoming campaign. Vanessa seemed impressed, nodding along and taking notes. But then came the question I'd been dreading. So, Sarah, Why did you leave your last position?" I hesitated, the practiced lie on the tip of my tongue, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the stress of the past few weeks, or the lingering guilt over Mark's decision. Whatever it was, I found myself telling the truth. "The company went bankrupt," I said, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. "My husband was the CFO, and he had to make some difficult decisions about layoffs." Vanessa's eyebrows shot up. "Your husband was the CFO, and he laid you off?" I swallowed hard. He felt he had to prioritize others who had greater need. The rest of the interview passed in a blur. Vanessa's questions became more pointed, her demeanor cooler. By the time I left the building, I knew I'd blown it. The one chance we had, and I'd ruined it with my honesty. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting back tears. How was I going to tell Mark? How were we going to survive this? My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "How did it go?" I stared at the screen, unable to form a reply. How could I tell him I'd failed? That his mistake had cost us yet another opportunity. As I drove home, my mind raced. We'd have to sell the house, that was clear now. But where would we go? My parents' place was too small, and Mark's lived across the country. The kids would have to change schools, leave their friends behind. Everything we'd worked so hard for was slipping away. I pulled into our driveway, dreading the conversation ahead. But as I stepped out of the car, I noticed something odd. Mark's car was gone, and there was a strange vehicle parked on the street. A beat-up old truck I didn't recognize. Confused, I hurried into the house. "Mark," I called out. "Are you home?" "In here," came his reply from the kitchen. I walked in to find Mark sitting at the table with a stranger, a rough-looking man in work clothes, covered in what looked like drywall dust. "Sarah," Mark said, standing up. "This is Joe. He's offered me a job." I blinked, trying to process this information. A job? What kind of job? Joe stood, extending a calloused hand. "Construction, ma'am. It ain't glamorous, but it's honest work. Your husband here says he's willing to learn." I shook Joe's hand automatically, my mind reeling. Mark, in construction. My suit-wearing, spreadsheet-loving husband. After Joe left, promising to pick Mark up early the next morning, I turned to my husband. "Mark, what is this? What about Dave? The company?" Mark's shoulders slumped. "I called Dave, like I promised. But I couldn't do it, Sarah. I couldn't take away his lifeline, so I found another way. It's not much, but it's a start." I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "But you don't know anything about construction. And what about your career? Your reputation?" "None of that matters anymore," Mark said, kneeling beside me. "What matters is us, our family. I messed up, Sarah. I put others before you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I'm trying to make it right. Please, give me a chance." As I looked into his eyes, I saw the man I fell in love with. Determined, caring, willing to do whatever it took for his family. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of hope. "Okay," I whispered, taking his hand. "We'll figure this out. Together." The next few months were the hardest of our lives. Mark came home each day exhausted, his hands blistered and raw. I took on part-time work wherever I could find it. Waitressing, dog walking, anything to bring in a little extra money. We sold our house, moving into a tiny apartment across town. The kids struggled to adjust, acting out in school and at home. But slowly, things began to change. Mark's body toughened, his skills improved. He started bringing home a steadier paycheck. I found a job as a marketing consultant for small businesses, allowing me to work from home and be there for the kids. It wasn't the life we'd planned, but we were making it work. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of our small apartment, watching the sunset, Mark turned to me. "I saw Dave today," he said quietly. I tensed, memories of our old life flooding back. "Oh, how is he?" Mark sighed. "Not good. The company finally folded completely. He's out of a job, just like everyone else." I felt a mix of emotions. Sympathy for Dave, relief that we'd already weathered the worst, a tiny, mean part of me that felt vindicated. "What will he do?" "I don't know," Mark said. "But I offered him a job on our crew, if he wants it." I stared at my husband, this man who had changed so much and yet remained fundamentally the same. Always trying to help, always seeing the best in people. "You're a good man, Mark Thompson," I said, leaning into him. He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "I'm trying to be, for you, for us." As we sat there, watching the sky turn from orange to deep purple, I realized something. We'd lost so much. Our home, our status, our sense of security. But we'd gained something too. A resilience we never knew we had. A deeper understanding of what really mattered. And a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Our journey was far from over. We still had mountains to climb, debts to pay, dreams to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I felt truly hopeful. Whatever came next, we would face it together. As the weeks turned into months, our new life began to take shape. It wasn't easy, but we were adapting. Mark's construction skills improved rapidly, and he started taking on side jobs on weekends to bring in extra money. I expanded my client base, building a small but steady stream of marketing work. One Saturday morning, as I sat at our tiny kitchen table working on a client's social media strategy, Mark burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, you won't believe what happened," he exclaimed, still breathless from rushing up the stairs. I looked up from my laptop, intrigued by his enthusiasm. "What is it?" He pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes shining. "You remember that big renovation project we've been working on? The old factory conversion?" I nodded. Mark had been talking about this project for weeks, excited about the challenge it presented. "Well, the client came by today for an inspection. He was so impressed with our work that he offered me a permanent position as project manager for his development company." My heart skipped a beat. "Mark, that's amazing, but are you sure? It's a big change from what you were doing before." He reached across the table, taking my hands in his. "I know it's not what we planned, but Sarah, I love this work. It's challenging, it's rewarding, and I'm good at it. Plus, the salary, it's not what I was making before, but it's enough. We could move to a better place, maybe even start saving for the kids, college again." As I looked into his eyes, I saw a spark that had been missing for far too long. This wasn't just about money or security. This was about passion, about finding purpose in unexpected places. "I'm so proud of you," I said, squeezing his hands. "If this is what you want, I'm behind you 100%. He pulled me into a tight hug, and for a moment, we just held each other, savoring this glimpse of a brighter future. But life, as we'd learned, is never simple. Just as things were looking up for us, we received news that shook our world once again. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the call came. I was helping our daughter with her homework, while Mark was out picking up groceries. The caller ID showed Dave's name, and I felt a twinge of unease as I answered. "Sarah?" Dave's voice was thick with emotion. "Is Mark there?" "He's out at the moment," I replied, my concern growing. "Dave, what's wrong?" There was a long pause, broken only by the sound of Dave's ragged breathing. "It's Lisa," he finally said, referring to his wife. She lost the baby, and now she's in the hospital. The doctors say—" His voice broke, and I heard muffled sobs. My heart sank. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel for Dave and Lisa. They had been so excited about the baby, their little ray of hope in all the chaos. "Dave, I'm so sorry," I said softly. "What can we do? Do you need anything?" He took a shaky breath. I don't know. I didn't know who else to call. Mark's been such a good friend, even after everything." The guilt I'd been carrying around for months suddenly felt heavier than ever. While we'd been focused on rebuilding our lives, Dave and Lisa had been facing their own struggles. And despite everything, they still turned to us in their time of need. "Listen, Dave," I said, making a split-second decision. "Give me the name of the hospital. We'll be there as soon as we can." After hanging up, I quickly called Mark and filled him in. He rushed home, and within an hour, we were on our way to the hospital. Our kids dropped off at a neighbor's house. As we drove, a tense silence filled the car. We were both lost in our own thoughts, grappling with the complex emotions this situation stirred up. Finally, Mark spoke. "I can't help but feel responsible somehow. If I hadn't kept Dave on at the company..." I reached over and squeezed his arm. "Mark, you can't think like that. You did what you thought was right at the time. We had no way of knowing how things would turn out." He nodded, but I could see the weight of guilt in his eyes. It was a feeling I knew all too well. At the hospital, we found Dave slumped in a chair outside Lisa's room, looking utterly broken. When he saw us, he stood up, his eyes red-rimmed and bleary. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark stepped forward, pulling Dave into a hug. "Of course we came. We're here for you, buddy." As I watched them, I felt a surge of emotions: compassion, regret, a bittersweet appreciation for the bonds that could survive even the toughest trials. The next few hours were a blur of hushed conversations, cups of bad hospital coffee, and long periods of anxious waiting. Lisa had developed complications after losing the baby, and the doctors were monitoring her closely. As night fell, I found myself alone with Dave in the hospital cafeteria, both of us picking at plates of unappetizing food. "I'm sorry," Dave said suddenly, breaking the uncomfortable silence. I looked up, surprised. "For what?" He met my eyes, his gaze steady despite the exhaustion etched on his face. "For everything. For being the reason Mark chose to keep me on instead of you. For not realizing sooner how much it was costing your family." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Dave, you don't have to." He held up a hand, cutting me off. "Please, let me say this. I was so focused on my own problems, on providing for Lisa and the baby, that I didn't see the bigger picture. I should have turned down Mark's offer, found another way." As I listened to Dave's words, I felt something shift inside me. The resentment I'd been carrying, the anger at the unfairness of it all, began to melt away. "We all made choices," I said softly. "Some good, some bad, but we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward and be there for each other now." Dave nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "You're a good person, Sarah. Both of you are. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." Just then, Mark appeared in the cafeteria doorway, his face pale, but his eyes bright. "Dave," he called out, "the doctor wants to talk to you. Lisa's awake." As Dave rushed out, Mark came over to me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked softly. I leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. "Yeah," I replied. "I think I am." In that moment, surrounded by the harsh fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant, I realized something profound. Our journey hadn't just been about surviving financial ruin or rebuilding our lives. It had been about rediscovering our humanity, our capacity for forgiveness and compassion. As we walked back to Lisa's room, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We still had a long road ahead, full of challenges and uncertainties, But we had each other, and we had friends who had become family through shared hardships. Whatever the future held, I knew we would face it together, stronger and wiser for all we had endured. As we entered Lisa's hospital room, the atmosphere was heavy with emotion. Lisa lay in the bed, pale and fragile, but her eyes lit up when she saw us. Dave rushed to her side, taking her hand gently in his. "Sarah, Mark," Lisa said weakly, "you didn't have to come." I moved to the other side of her bed, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Of course we did. We're here for you, both of you." The next few days were a whirlwind of hospital visits, late-night phone calls, and juggling our own responsibilities, with supporting Dave and Lisa. Despite the tragic loss of their baby, Lisa's health gradually improved, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery. One evening, as Mark and I were leaving the hospital, we ran into Lisa's doctor in the parking lot. She recognized us and stopped to chat. "Your friends are lucky to have you," she said, her eyes kind but tired. "Support like yours can make all the difference in recovery, both physical and emotional." As we drove home, her words echoed in my mind. It struck me how much our lives had changed, how our priorities had shifted. A few months ago, we were consumed by our own problems, focused solely on survival. Now, here we were, putting our own challenges aside to be there for friends in need. "What are you thinking about?" Mark asked, noticing my silence. I turned to him, a small smile on my face. "Just how far we've come, how much we've grown." He reached over and took my hand, his eyes briefly leaving the road to meet mine. "We have, haven't we? It hasn't been easy, but I think we're stronger for it." As we pulled into our apartment complex, I saw our neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, struggling with her groceries. Without hesitation, Mark parked the car and jumped out to help her. Watching him, I felt a surge of pride and love. This was the man I married, kind, compassionate, always ready to lend a hand. Our recent hardships hadn't broken him. They'd revealed his true strength. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind buzzing with an idea that had been forming over the past few days. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, and made my way to the kitchen table where my laptop sat. For the next few hours, I researched, planned, and drafted. By the time Mark stumbled out of the bedroom, bleary-eyed and yawning, I had a proposal ready. "What's all this?" he asked, peering over my shoulder at the screen. I took a deep breath, suddenly nervous. It's a business plan for a marketing agency specializing in small businesses and startups. Mark's eyebrows shot up. "A business plan? You're thinking of starting your own agency?" I nodded, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I've been doing freelance work for a while now, and I've realized there's a real need for affordable, quality marketing services for small businesses, especially now, with so many people starting over after the economic downturn." Mark was silent for a moment, and I felt my heart race. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "Sarah, that's brilliant. You've always been amazing at what you do. If anyone can make this work, it's you." His enthusiasm was contagious, and soon we were both caught up in the excitement of possibility. We spent the rest of the morning going over the plan, refining ideas, and dreaming about the future. As we worked, I couldn't help but reflect on how different this felt from our old life. Back then, success meant climbing the corporate ladder, chasing bigger paychecks and fancier titles. Now, it was about creating something meaningful, something that could help others while allowing us to build a sustainable life for our family. Over the next few weeks, my idea began to take shape. I reached out to my network of contacts, many of whom were struggling entrepreneurs themselves. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People were excited about the prospect of affordable, professional marketing help. One Saturday afternoon, as I was working on my business plan at our kitchen table, our daughter, Emma, came up to me. "Mom, what are you doing?" she asked, peering at my laptop screen. I smiled, pulling her onto my lap. "I'm working on starting my own business, sweetie. Remember how I used to work for a big company? Well, now I'm going to help smaller companies grow." Emma's eyes widened. "Like a superhero for little businesses," I laughed, touched by her innocent perspective. "Something like that, yes." She was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mom, are we going to be okay now? I heard you and Dad talking about money problems before." My heart clenched. I hadn't realized how much our financial struggles had affected her. "Oh, honey," I said, hugging her close. "We're going to be just fine. Things were tough for a while, but your dad and I are working hard to make everything better. And you know what? Sometimes when things get hard, we learn and grow and become even stronger." Emma nodded, seeming to accept this. Then she grinned mischievously. "Does this mean we can get a dog now?" I laughed, ruffling her hair. "Let's take it one step at a time, okay?" As Emma skipped off to play, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about rebuilding our financial security anymore. It was about setting an example for our children, showing them that with hard work, resilience, and compassion, we could overcome any obstacle. The following week, I had my first official client meeting for my new agency. It was with a small bakery that had been struggling since the economic downturn. As I sat across from the owner, Maria, in her tiny, flour-dusted office, I was struck by the passion in her eyes as she talked about her business. "This bakery was my mother's dream," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "She passed away last year, and I promised her I'd keep it going. But with everything that's happened, I'm barely staying afloat." I reached out, placing my hand over hers. "I'm Maria. That's exactly why I started this agency, to help businesses like yours not just survive, but thrive. Let's work together and make your mother proud." As we dove into planning her marketing strategy, I felt a thrill of excitement. This was what I was meant to do, using my skills to make a real difference in people's lives. That evening, as Mark and I sat on our small balcony, watching the sunset and sharing a bottle of cheap wine, I filled him in on my meeting with Maria. "Well, you should have seen her face when we finished the session," I said, unable to keep the enthusiasm out of my voice. For the first time in months, she looked hopeful. Mark smiled, pulling me close. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah. You've taken this awful situation and turned it into an opportunity to help others. You're amazing. You know that." I leaned into him, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. "We're amazing," I corrected him. I couldn't have done any of this without you." As we sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, I thought about how far we'd come. The pain of losing our old life was still there, a dull ache that flared up sometimes when I least expected it. But it was overshadowed by something else now, a sense of purpose, of growth, of newfound strength. Our family had been tested, pushed to the brink, but we hadn't broken. Instead, we'd bent, adapted, and emerged stronger than ever. We'd learned the true value of friendship, the power of community, and the importance of resilience. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. As darkness fell, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We still had challenges ahead, dreams to chase, and a long way to go. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. Whatever came next, I knew we would face it together, stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than ever before. As the weeks turned into months, my fledgling marketing agency began to grow. Word spread quickly among small business owners, and soon I found myself with a steady stream of clients. Each one had a unique story, a dream they were fighting to keep alive in the face of economic uncertainty. Their determination inspired me, pushing me to work harder and think more creatively. One particularly memorable client was Joe, a veteran who had opened a small coffee shop after returning from his last tour. His business was struggling, not for lack of quality or effort, but because he didn't know how to effectively market in the digital age. "I can brew a mean cup of Joe," he told me during our first meeting, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "But all this social media stuff, it's like trying to learn a foreign language." I smiled, understanding his frustration. "That's where I come in, Joe. We'll start simple and work our way up. By the time we're done, you'll be an Instagram barista extraordinaire." Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Joe, teaching him the basics of social media marketing, helping him craft engaging posts, and setting up a simple but effective website. Watching his face light up when he got his first online order was a moment I'll never forget. As my business grew, so did our financial stability. We were able to move to a slightly larger apartment, one with a small office space where I could work without spreading papers all over the kitchen table. It wasn't our old house, but it felt like home. Mark's career in construction was also flourishing. He had a natural talent for project management, and his background in finance gave him an edge when it came to budgeting and cost analysis. He came home every day with a sense of satisfaction that I'd never seen in him during his corporate days. One evening, as we were preparing dinner together, a new habit we'd formed in our post-bankruptcy life, Mark turned to me with a serious expression. "Sarah, I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant. "Remember that savings account we started for the kids' college fund? The one we had to empty when, well, you know." I nodded, feeling a twinge of old pain at the memory. "What about it?" He took a deep breath. "I think we should start it up again. We're in a better place now, and even if we can only put a little bit away each month, it's something." I felt a lump form in my throat. This simple suggestion represented so much: hope for the future, faith in our ability to provide for our children, a return to the stability we'd lost. Without a word, I wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his chest. "I take it that's a yes," he chuckled, hugging me back. "It's a definite yes," I mumbled into his shirt. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come. A year ago, we were drowning in debt, our marriage strained to the breaking point. Now, we were talking about saving for our children's future again. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming our dreams, our hopes for our family. The next morning, I woke up early, energized by a new idea. I made my way to the living room, careful not to wake Mark or the kids. Opening my laptop, I began to type furiously, the words flowing faster than I could get them down. Hours later, Mark found me still at it, surrounded by empty coffee mugs. "What's got you so fired up?" he asked, peering over my shoulder. I looked up at him, my eyes bright with excitement. "I'm writing a book," I said. "About our experience, about starting over, about finding strength in adversity. I think it could help people, people who are going through what we went through." Mark's face broke into a wide grin. "Sarah, that's incredible." "You're incredible." He leaned down to kiss me, then paused. "But, maybe take a shower first. You've got that wild-eyed caffeine look going on." I laughed, realizing for the first time how disheveled I must look. As I headed to the shower, my mind was already racing with more ideas for the book. This wasn't just our story anymore. It was a message of hope, a roadmap for others who found themselves at rock bottom. Over the next few months, I threw myself into writing whenever I had a spare moment. Between running my agency, being there for the kids, and working on the book, I was busier than I'd ever been. But it was a good kind of busy, purposeful, fulfilling. One Saturday afternoon, as I was deep in the writing zone, our son, Tyler, came into my office. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "can I talk to you about something?" I immediately saved my work and turned to him, giving him my full attention. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" He fidgeted for a moment, then blurted out, "I want to start a business, like you did." I blinked, surprised. "A business? What kind of business?" Tyler's words came out in a rush. "Well, you know how I've been learning to code? I thought maybe I could make apps for kids, educational ones, to help them learn stuff while having fun." As I listened to him excitedly outline his ideas, I felt a swell of pride. Our struggles hadn't broken our children, they'd inspired them. Tyler had seen us fall and get back up, had watched us rebuild our lives from scratch, and now he wanted to create something of his own. "That sounds like an amazing idea, Tyler," I said, pulling him in for a hug. "How about we sit down together later and start working on a plan? I think your dad might have some good input too." Tyler's face lit up. "Really? You'll help me?" "Of course we will," I assured him. "That's what family does. We support each other's dreams." That evening, as the four of us sat around the dinner table, brainstorming ideas for Tyler's app business, I was struck by how much our family dynamic had changed. We were no longer just parents and children. We were a team, each of us bringing our own strengths and ideas to the table. Emma, not wanting to be left out, chimed in with her own suggestions. What if the app taught kids about animals? I could draw the pictures. We all laughed, but Mark looked thoughtful. That's not a bad idea. Combining Tyler's coding with Emma's art, you two could make a great team." As I watched my children's eyes light up with possibilities, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Despite everything we'd been through, or perhaps because of it, our family had emerged stronger, more united, more resilient. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Mark and I sat on our small balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked softly. "Our old life?" Mark was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I miss the security, the ease of it all. But then I look at our family now, at the people we've become, and I wouldn't trade this for anything." I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. "Me neither," I whispered. As we sat there in comfortable silence, I thought about the journey we'd been on. We'd lost so much, our home, our jobs, our sense of security, but we'd gained something far more valuable. We'd discovered our strength, our resilience. We'd learned the true meaning of family and friendship. We'd found purpose in helping others, in creating something meaningful from the ashes of our old life. Our story wasn't over, far from it. We still had challenges to face, dreams to chase, a future to build. But whatever came next, I knew we would face it together, stronger and wiser for all we had endured. As the cool night air brushed against my skin, I closed my eyes and smiled. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about what tomorrow might bring. As the seasons changed and another year passed, our lives continued to evolve in ways I never could have imagined. My marketing agency had grown from a one-woman operation to a small but thriving business, employing a team of passionate individuals who shared my vision of helping small businesses succeed. Mark had been promoted to senior project manager at his construction firm, overseeing some of the city's most ambitious development projects. But perhaps the most surprising development came from an unexpected source: Dave. It was a crisp autumn morning when I received a call from him. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of excitement and nervousness. I need your advice. I'm thinking of starting my own business. I nearly dropped my phone in surprise. That's fantastic, Dave. What kind of business? He explained that after losing his job in finance, he'd taken up woodworking as a hobby to cope with the stress. To his surprise, he discovered a natural talent and passion for it. Now, he wanted to turn that passion into a career. I'm thinking of opening a custom furniture shop, he said. But I have no idea where to start with the business side of things. I was hoping you might be willing to help. Without hesitation, I agreed. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Dave, helping him develop a business plan, create a marketing strategy, and navigate the complexities of starting a small business. It was challenging work, but incredibly rewarding. Seeing the spark of hope in Dave's eyes reminded me of why I'd started my agency in the first place. One evening, as Dave and I were wrapping up a particularly productive planning session, he turned to me with a serious expression. "Sarah," he said softly, "I never properly apologized for what happened. With the company, with Mark's decision. I'm so sorry for the pain it caused your family." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Dave, you don't have to." He held up a hand, cutting me off gently. "Please, let me say this. I was so focused on my own problems that I didn't see how much you were struggling. And now, after everything, you're here helping me start over. You and Mark. You're better friends than I deserve." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "That's what friends do, Dave. We help each other up when we fall. And for what it's worth, I think I needed to go through all of that to get where I am now. Sometimes, our biggest challenges lead us to our true calling." As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but marvel at how life had come full circle. The very decision that had once threatened to destroy our family had ultimately led to this moment of growth and reconciliation. At home, I found Mark and the kids huddled around Tyler's computer, excitedly discussing something. As I approached, I saw a colorful app interface on the screen, featuring cartoon animals and interactive educational games. "Mom!" Tyler exclaimed when he saw me. "We did it! The app is finished!" I looked at Mark, who was beaming with pride. "They've been working on it non-stop," he explained. "Tyler did the coding, Emma did the artwork, and I helped with some of the business aspects. We just submitted it to the App Store for approval." I felt a surge of emotion as I looked at my family, my brilliant, resilient, creative family. They had taken the lessons from our hardships and turned them into something positive, something that could help other children learn and grow. "I'm so proud of all of you," I said, pulling them into a group hug. That night, as Mark and I lay in bed, I turned to him with tears in my eyes. "Can you believe how far we've come?" I whispered. He pulled me close, kissing my forehead. "It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? But I wouldn't change a thing. Every struggle, every setback, it all led us here." I nodded, thinking about the book I was writing, now nearing completion. It had evolved from a simple retelling of our story into a guide for others facing similar challenges, a beacon of hope in difficult times. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling an inexplicable sense of anticipation. As I made my way to the kitchen to start the coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a publisher I had contacted months ago about my book. With trembling hands, I opened the email. As I read its contents, I felt my heart race. They wanted to publish my book. Not only that, but they believed it had the potential to help countless others who were struggling to rebuild their lives after financial hardship. I must have made some sort of noise, because suddenly, Mark was there, looking concerned. "Sarah, what is it?" Wordlessly, I handed him my phone. As he read the email, his expression changed from concern to shock to pure joy. "Sarah, this is incredible," he exclaimed, pulling me into a tight embrace. I always knew you could do it. Your words, your experience, it's going to help so many people." As we celebrated this new development, I couldn't help but reflect on the long and winding path that had led us here. From the depths of despair and financial ruin, we had clawed our way back, not just to stability, but to a life filled with purpose and meaning. Over the next few months, life became a whirlwind of activity. Between finalizing my book, running my agency, and helping Dave get his furniture business off the ground, I barely had a moment to breathe. But it was a good kind of busy, the kind that left me feeling fulfilled and energized at the end of each day. Tyler's app was approved and launched in the App Store, quickly gaining popularity among parents and educators. Emma's artwork received particular praise, and she began talking about studying animation in college. Our children, who had once been shaken by our family's crisis, were now thriving, their experiences having shaped them into resilient, creative young adults. Dave's furniture business slowly but steadily grew, with his unique designs catching the eye of several high-end boutiques. Watching him rediscover his confidence and passion was incredibly rewarding. Lisa, too, seemed to have found new purpose, throwing herself into volunteer work at a local women's shelter. As for Mark and me, our relationship had deepened in ways I never thought possible. The trials we had faced together had forged an unbreakable bond between us. We had learned to communicate more openly, to support each other's dreams, and to find joy in the simple moments of our new life. The day my book was officially released was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Seeing my name on the cover, holding the physical manifestation of our journey in my hands, it was overwhelming, but nothing could have prepared me for the response. Within weeks, I began receiving messages from readers around the country, people who had found hope in our story, who had been inspired to take control of their own lives and start over. Some had started their own businesses. Others had gone back to school, and many had simply found the courage to keep going in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. One evening, as I sat on our balcony, reading through some of these messages with tears in my eyes, Mark joined me. "You did it, Sarah," he said softly. "You turned our darkest moment into a light for others." I looked up at him, my heart full of love and gratitude. "We did it," I corrected him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, without our family," he smiled, taking my hand in his. "You know, when I made that decision to save Dave's job, I thought I was ruining our lives. I never could have imagined it would lead us here." I squeezed his hand, thinking about all we had been through. Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? Sometimes the things we think will break us end up being the very things that make us stronger. As we sat there, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. Our journey had been long and difficult, filled with unexpected twists and painful setbacks, but it had also been beautiful, transformative, and ultimately triumphant. We had lost our company, our financial security, and our old way of life. But in return, we had gained so much more: resilience, purpose, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters in life. We had rediscovered the strength of our family bonds, the power of true friendship, and the incredible capacity for growth that lies within each of us. Our story wasn't over, far from it. There would be new challenges to face, new mountains to climb. But I knew that whatever came our way, we would face it together, stronger and wiser for all we had endured. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, I leaned my head on Mark's shoulder, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for our journey. Every painful step, every hard-won victory, every moment of growth and discovery. We had lost everything, only to find something far more valuable in the end: the unshakable knowledge that with love, determination, and the support of those around us, we could overcome anything. And in that knowledge lay the greatest wealth of all, the wealth of hope, of possibility, of a future limited only by the boundaries of our own dreams.